King Philip V was crowned at 17. Then he fell in love and would not eat, sleep, or rule unless she was beside him. When the queen disappeared, the king broke, and Spain paid the price. This is the story of the king who could not rule his own heart. Philip was never meant to be king. Born in 1683 at Versailles, he was a grandson of Louis XIV of France, the Sun King himself. Yet from childhood, Philip seemed unlike the glittering princes who surrounded him. He rarely laughed, rarely spoke, and was so withdrawn that tutors wondered if he even grasped the world around him. When other boys wrestled in gardens or sparred with wooden swords, Philip sat motionless, staring at the floor. Servants sometimes shook him just to see if he would respond. They began to call him the Silent Bourbon. His one attachment was his mother, Maria Anna of Bavaria. To her, the boy clung fiercely, hiding behind her skirts at gatherings and following her through corridors like a shadow. Maria Anna tried to give her son moments of warmth in the rigid court of Versailles. They walked the palace gardens together, prayed in the royal chapel, and she encouraged him to read scripture when other children were playing games of war. But in 1690, when Philip was just 7 years old, Maria Anna died of tuberculosis. For Philip, it was devastating. He did not cry, did not protest. He simply stopped speaking for days at a time, drifting like a ghost through Versailles. Some today suspect early signs of depression or mental illness. Others believe it was the wound of losing the only person who anchored him. Whatever the cause, the strangeness would never leave him. History, however, has little mercy for fragile souls. When King Charles II of Spain died childless in 1700, the great question of Europe was who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire. Louis XIV maneuvered masterfully, and by the will of Charles himself, young Philip, barely 17, was declared King of Spain. The boy who had avoided eye contact was suddenly master of a realm stretching from Madrid to Mexico, Naples to Peru. He spoke no Spanish. He had no experience of rule. Yet there he was, crowned Philip V, the first Bourbon king of Spain. At first, the Spanish people were cautiously hopeful. Many welcomed him as a fresh beginning, the prince who would restore vigor to a fading dynasty. Others were suspicious. He was French-born, a Bourbon, a foreigner who seemed pale and withdrawn compared to the grandeur of the Habsburg kings before him. His arrival was greeted with awe, yes, but also unease. Few could have imagined that their new monarch would be ruled less by politics than by his own fragile heart. The court in Madrid received him with both deference and doubt. Spaniards called him El Animoso, the spirited, though few saw much spirit in the teenager. He was dutiful, polite, but seemed always elsewhere, as if the crown itself weighed him into silence. Ministers whispered he was pliable, easily led, a vessel to be filled with the will of others. And into that vessel, one figure poured herself completely, his young queen, Maria Luisa of Savoy. Maria Luisa was only 13 when she married Philip in 1701. Their marriage was arranged by dynastic necessity, sealing an alliance between France and Savoy. She came from the House of Savoy, an old Italian dynasty with strong ties to European courts. Philip and Maria Luisa had never met before their betrothal. It was arranged on paper and sealed in ceremony. Yet from the moment they were wed, Philip treated her not merely as a political bride, but as his sole source of comfort. At first, their bond seemed innocent. He gazed at her with rapt devotion, wrote her tender letters, and clung to her hand in public. They dined together, walked together, prayed together, and for a brief time courtiers found it charming. But the charm quickly darkened. He could not bear for her to leave his side. He refused to eat unless she fed him. He demanded her presence at councils, at church, in every chamber of the palace. By night, his desperation grew unbearable. He could not sleep unless his body touched hers. If she shifted away, he would cry out in panic. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Did he become obsessed immediately? Not quite. In the first months, his attachment seemed like youthful infatuation, but within a year, it hardened into compulsion. Soon, they did nearly everything together, not out of choice, but because he required it. If she attempted to step away, he would scream, not like a man, but like a child abandoned in the dark. Courtiers tried to excuse it as passion, but passion does not consume a government. Philip spent hours in bed whispering to his wife instead of ruling. Military orders went unsigned, reforms unattended, councils dismissed. Ministers began calling Maria Luisa the Shadow Queen, for she was never absent from his side. One diplomat wrote, "The king lives only in her presence, and without her, he is nothing." This dependency enraged others at court. His family in France and members of the Spanish nobility complained that governance was impossible. Servants and ministers sometimes schemed to separate the king from his queen for even brief moments. But nearly every attempt failed. The deeper they tried to pry him away, the tighter he clung. The strain on Maria Luisa was immense. By her early 20s, she was frail, exhausted, her bright eyes dulled by endless nights in the suffocating chamber. She rarely smiled. Her voice grew hoarse with fatigue. Did she try to escape this prison? Some accounts suggest she begged for moments of privacy, but in the rigid world of monarchy, and under Philip's obsessive grip, she had little choice. She endured until she could endure no more. In 1714, after years of emotional captivity, Maria Luisa of Savoy died at just 25. Philip collapsed. He refused to rise, refused to eat, refused even to admit her death. For weeks he muttered that she was not gone, only hiding. Ministers despaired. Spain had no ruler, only a king prostrate in grief. To preserve the monarchy, advisors urged him to remarry. Their choice was Elizabeth Farnese of Parma. Born into the ducal house of Farnese, Elizabeth was Italian nobility, sharp, ambitious, and shrewd. Unlike Maria Luisa, she was not meek. She was known for her strong will and political intelligence. Philip married her only months after Maria Luisa's death. But he did not marry Elizabeth as herself. He dressed her in his first wife's gowns, ordered her to wear her perfume, demanded she echo her words. Elizabeth was not a wife, but a replacement, a ghost meant to soothe a widower's madness. At first, she tolerated the role, but the expectations became commands, and the commands became rules. She was told when to walk, when to speak, even when to breathe. Meanwhile, Philip slipped further. He abandoned royal garments for sackcloth. He shaved his head, refused shoes, and avoided daylight. He muttered prayers for hours, burst into manic laughter, then collapsed into tears. Yes, doctors were summoned. Royal physicians attended him often. Some diagnosed him with melancholia. Others whispered of possession. Treatments ranged from bloodletting to religious cures, but nothing improved his condition. Through it all, Elizabeth remained his wife, his caretaker, and at times, his warden. By 1724, Philip's instability could no longer be disguised. He abdicated in favor of his son, Louis I, a bright youth of 17. For 7 brief months, Spain breathed easier. But in August 1724, Louis contracted smallpox. The disease ravaged him quickly, and within weeks he was dead. His reign had lasted less than a year. When news reached Philip, courtiers expected him to collapse in grief. Instead, he smiled. "God has returned the crown to its rightful head," he said, and reclaimed the throne. The following years were grotesque. Philip locked himself in darkened chambers, refusing to bathe, refusing to cut his nails. The stench of decay was no metaphor. It was the stench of his unwashed body. His sweat-soaked garments, the filth of a king who lived as though he were already entombed. Ministers conducted business through Elizabeth, who acted as both queen and nurse. Decrees were filtered through curtains heavy with incense to mask the foulness of the room. Ambassadors wrote that Spain was ruled not by a monarch, but by shadows and whispers. As decades passed, Philip's world shrank to a bed, a wife treated as a phantom, and a mind gnawed apart by its own grief. He rarely appeared in public. When he did, he was a ragged, trembling figure, eyes wild, garments disordered, body wasted by neglect. He had become a ghost on a throne, a monarch who ruled nothing but his own misery. On July the 9th, 1746, at 4 in the morning, the long nightmare ended. Philip V of Spain died in his bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, murmuring the name of Maria Luisa with his last breath. There was no triumphal procession, no grand display of Bourbon power, only silence, relief, and the slow exhale of a nation that had endured 40 years under a king consumed by grief. History books list him as the first Bourbon monarch of Spain, a dynastic founder who carried France's legacy into Iberia. But behind the crown, Philip V was something else. A boy scarred by loss, a husband whose love became a prison, a king who surrendered not to enemies or armies, but to his own mind. His reign reminds us that history's grandest titles cannot shield a soul from obsession, that even a ruler of empires can be undone by the shadows in his heart.